Hello, everyone. We're going to take a few minutes as folks are joining in before we get started today. So as you come on in, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, say hello. We'll do a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. We want to encourage everyone to think of questions during this conversation. Put those in the Q&A tab in the toolbar of your Zoom, and we'll save some time to answer those at the end. We also would love to hear from you, sort of where you're from, who you are, what your kind of general interest is in these topics. So please throw that in the chat and feel free to talk to each other. And we'll give it another minute here for more of our attendees. Oh, it says chat is disabled. Let's see. We got to enable that for participants, don't we? Just one moment. We'll get that sorted out while we are. There we go. Martin, thank you for mentioning that in the Q&A. I believe the chat feature is now working. Would someone give me a quick check there? Lovely. There we go. Hi, Kelly. Hi, Shirley. Welcome, everyone. Okay, I think we're just about ready to get started as more folks trickle in. So I'll repeat one more time. We're going to have a very sort of conversational presentation today. We'll be doing some demos. We'll be talking about a lot of different topics throughout this whole process. We really encourage you to use the Q&A button in your Zoom toolbar to ask any questions that you have. We'll save time at the end to answer those questions. And then also to use the webinar chat to introduce yourselves, explain why you're here, what's most interesting to you, maybe chat with each other. We certainly encourage you to do that. And we'll be dropping in and out of the chat as we go as well. So let's get started. Today's conversation is about Core Web Vitals and improving the end user's experience in Drupal. This is a joint presentation between the Drupal Association, Google, and Tag1 Consulting, who have partnered together to make improvements to the Drupal platform that improve this experience for end users and hopefully improve the experience of the open web in general. If you've heard of Core Web Vitals before, you might think of them as sort of performance metrics or things like that. But this focus specifically on the end user's experience, on how these metrics impact the experience of using a site is really crucial to this idea and why we're focusing on that. And we'll talk more about that today as we get into the topic. Our speakers today, I'm thrilled to introduce Andre, who is the strategic partner manager who works in the Chrome team at Google. Adam, who's a developer relations engineer, also on the Chrome team at Google and part of the WordPress community. Myself, I'm Tim Lennon or Hestenet on Drupal.org, the CTO of the Drupal Association, which is the 501c3 nonprofit that supports the Drupal project. Fabian, who's the VP of Software Engineering at Tag1 Consulting. Yanis, who's a senior engineer in the multimedia orientation at Tag1 Consulting as well. And together we're going to talk about general ideas around end user experience performance. We're going to talk about prior collaborations and the history of the collaboration of our organizations together as partners and some future ideas. So our topics today, we'll start with the Core Web Vitals themselves, what they are, why they're important, and sort of a practical demo of kind of what they mean, how they work. We'll talk about our collaboration, how Tag1 and Google together implemented some meaningful changes in Drupal already, and some of those successes that are hopefully already reaping benefits for your own sites. And we'll talk about upcoming projects and collaborations between the Drupal Association, Tag1, Google, and hopefully other folks. If you yourselves are interested in partnering or have ideas or have some resources that you'd like to support some of these ideas, we'd certainly love to hear about it and create some opportunities for even more collaboration and involvement. And then finally, we'll go into that Q&A portion. So to kick things off, I'm going to hand things over to Andre, who is going to give us that sort of basic orientation to the Core Web Vitals, talk about really sort of why they're important, what we're doing here, and then do this little bit of a demo of taking a look at a couple sites and understanding what their meaningful impact really is. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let Andre take it away.
Perfect. Thanks for the setup, Tim, and thanks for having us here. It's a great pleasure, as always, being with the Drupal community. It's always exciting and always one of my highlights of the day, and if not a month. So look, many of you, let's quick show of hands if in the chat, if you've never heard of Core Web Vitals before, just type that you haven't. I should have come up with a clear thing for you to type, like type no idea. Go.
Yeah, if
Anybody
you're not familiar at all with this concept, let us know in the chat.
Yeah.
I know it takes a second to find that window.
Wait for the chat to come alive, which I think in this case is okay. New to Jeremy, perfect. Well, in that case, look, we'll take it. We won't make any assumptions, so we'll try to cover all the elements of this. But the concept has been around for a while now, and it has also been part of the discussion within the Drupal community for quite some time as well. So hopefully there'll be a good mix of people here who can actually help each other in the spirit of the community. But in a nutshell, like Tim said, getting user experience right is complex, and understanding what and how to measure it is not always straightforward. So in an effort to make it easier, the Chrome team has introduced a set of metrics that are meant to be comprehensive enough, covering several major aspects of the user experience and reasonably independent of each other, allowing for us to look at what happens to your users on your websites in real time, and then provide that information back to you so you can make decisions about the elements and aspects and the various functionalities of your website. These three aspects that we're looking at are the speed of delivery of the most important concept to your user. That is something that is called LCP. We'll go over this in a little bit more detail with the tooling, so don't worry about it too much. It's called largest contentful paint. It basically is how fast the thing that the user came to the website for appears on the screen. Then something called FID, which is first input delay. This is quite simply how quickly the interactive elements on the website respond to the first interaction. Let's say you see a button, you want to tap on the button. Does something happen immediately? Does nothing happen for minutes? That's what we're measuring here. And then something called cumulative layout shift, which again sounds a little bit fancy, but all it means is how stable is the content of a page on the screen. Is it just randomly jumping around? The reasons, well, why would content be jumping around, you might ask yourself. You might be introducing banners to the top of the page once the main content has loaded, and that shifts the entire content down, right? There might be other reasons. Blocks might be arriving a little bit later in the life cycle of the page and shifting everything to the left and to the right. So what we're trying to measure is by how much. So we don't just say, well, it has shifted, but we can actually say, well, it has shifted by 10%, or by 5%, or by 1%, or by 90%. And so if over the lifetime of a page, which is basically the duration of the visit of a particular visitor, it has shifted tremendously, maybe that's not a great experience. If it hasn't shifted very much, that's much better. So those are the three things that we're looking at, and those are the three metrics that form part of the Core Web Vitals. But with that, I actually hand over to Fabian to talk a little bit about why we together believe, and why Tech1 as a development agency believes these metrics are actually important to take a look at.
Yeah. So why are those Core Web Vitals so important for developers, end users, and site owners? The answer is pretty simple. Developers want to make their site owner happy, and site owners want to make their end users happy. And all of those Core Web Vitals in effect are increasing happiness. For example, as Andre said, if you look at the cumulative layout shift, have you ever been on a website and you want to go to another link and you clicked and then a banner popped up, but you accidentally clicked on the ad? That's kind of like making you unhappy. Or have you ever been on a website and you really want to shop a product, but it just took way too long and you were like, maybe I just get it from that other website, which is just way faster in that. And so these are just two examples for why it is so important in general for the end user, because if an end user is not happy, if performance is not good of the Core Web Vitals, then they just go somewhere else. And if you've ever stared at a very blank screen, then you also will have like, well, I'm just leaving. And so, so end users definitely care about them, and Google cares about end users. That is why Google is penalizing sites that are not having great core web vitals. And that's the other part. So if you want to rank highly in the Google search, it's no longer enough to have like the best keywords, the best linking, etc. It's also important to have very good core web vitals. Because that's something Google is tracking. Everyone can see their own core web vitals, so it's well worth an exercise to look at your own core web vitals and to check what's the experience for my end users like. And Andre will be going in more detail here in a short moment. This is kind of the other part of the equation. A site user both wants to make their end users happy, but also Google, so it's higher ranked on the ranking screen. And so for developers, core web vitals are important to just know about them. What are they? How can I measure them? How can I improve them? How can I see if I'm doing a good job in core web vitals? Because again, if a developer is doing a great job, or a CMS like Drupal is doing a great job in providing nice core web vitals, then in the end, there will be so much more happy users on the internet, but also the experience will be so much better for everyone that is using the internet. And especially for, and we come to it a little bit later again, too, if you have like users also from Africa or whatever like that, it's worth a try to compare web vitals, not only for the fast users that are purely in the USA, but also from like developing countries and in other parts, just to have a very inclusive website.
I want to kind of break in before we go back to Andre to give us a sort of specific example of analyzing a couple of sites, to just add, one of the reasons it's really valuable to come up with these objective metrics that help measure end user experience is so that you can make this business case about why the user experience and sort of the sort of speed and accessibility and smooth interaction of the site is important, right? It's very easy to have folks suggest, hey, maybe we should have a full site takeover banner to do our promotional campaign, or maybe we should, maybe we should introduce this multi-element carousel with these really heavy images or things like that. And as a developer, you might have in your own mind this kind of instinctive notion that, no, I don't think that's going to be a good experience. But the Core Web Vitals give you a tool to make that case of why those things are important. And part of it's because expectations of users have changed. People are looking for, right? We experience the web through a browser, but we also experience it through app ecosystems. And we have this expectation of this instantaneous real-time responsiveness that comes from an app world. And if we want the open web to be able to compete on that level, we need to understand the factors and measure the factors that create that kind of experience. So sorry for that interjection, Andre, but I'll let you take it again from here.
No, this was perfect. Thanks for jumping in, Tim, and thanks, Fabian, for setting the context. I'll just put it out there, given that Adam and I are here from Google. We're not from the search team, so we don't talk about ranking because we don't know what's going on there. What I'd like to say is that it's not so much, from my understanding, it's not so much about penalizing anybody for anything. It's more about taking user experience into account, and Google search has tried that for a long time. And now with Chrome introducing, this is a major distinction. Maybe for some of you not so clear why we make it, but hopefully I'll explain. Because Chrome and search are independent. And these metrics were introduced by Chrome for the benefit of Chrome's users and web developers. And search kind of went, well, this is like the best thing since sliced bread, because finally we have something that we can measure user experience with, right? And therefore we can use it for our page experience update. And hopefully at some point the host will drop a link to the blog post by the search team explaining what the page experience update is all about. But those things are unrelated, right? The metrics were launched so we can do a better job of providing great user experiences. And the search team kind of went like, well, this is awesome. And I'm actually, personally, I'm kind of hoping that other search engines and maybe even other platforms that kind of care about users clicking on links and going somewhere also take this into account, because it's really easy to use and the data is publicly available. Bringing me to my next point. So let's take a look at how do you how do you find out what the core vitals for your website look like? There's multiple ways. We'll show you one. Not go into detail, a great amount of detail on all the possible tools. There's too many because we don't have all the time in the world. But let's take a look at something that's called page speed insights. Can you hear me now? Because Zoom always does this to me, right?
Yes, yes, we can.
I remember to turn my sound back on. There we go. So hopefully I'm sharing what I think I'm sharing. Because I can't even, yes, I know, I see which tab I'm sharing. This is perfect. Everything is working as intended. So page speed insights has had many different URLs in the past. It's finally found, I hope, its permanent home on the web.dev website, which is, by the way, Google's main source of information for web developers. So it makes total sense that this kind of tooling also lives there. Just go to pagespeed.web.dev. There's a field at the top to enter your URL. We picked a random one for no particular reason. Let's make it a bit of an Easter egg, like a pre-Christmas Easter egg. If you can identify the relevance of this website to the Drupal community, say that in the chat. So you put the URL in there, you click analyze, and what you get instantly, almost instantaneously, is data on the core vitals for this website. And in this particular case, it says passed. It might also fail. That's a very binary assessment, right away. There is no score here. Right? It's very important. There's no core. Remember this and tell all your friends. There is no such thing as a core vitals score. There's a Lighthouse score. It's a different thing. We might even take a look at it in a second. Core vitals don't have a score. You either pass them or you fail them. That's it, right? And then individual ones, they also don't have scores. Individual core vitals, they have their metrics, like they have the numbers associated with them. This here at the top three, right? Hopefully you can see what I'm highlighting. Are the three that I've been talking about. There's some additional ones. I'm not going to spend any time on those. The reason you get these instantaneously is because they're pulled from a publicly available database. Again, important disclaimer, important information for you to know is that only data from users who've consented into the sessions being logged by Chrome gets collected, and only if the traffic to the site in Chrome reaches a certain threshold, can Chrome then confidently say that this can be presented anonymously. So this means, on the one hand, that user privacy is really well protected in this sense. On the other hand, it means sites with a bit less traffic might not form part of this database, or individual pages, because here you see data for URL, right? But also the origin, which is the entire website. And you can see that the numbers almost don't change, but you can see them changing slightly. So this is for the URL, and this is for the entire website. Sometimes you might not have data for individual URLs, but you might have it for the whole website. Sometimes you might not have it for the entire website either. So what are we looking at, right? There's some pass rates. These thresholds have been set experimentally, and there's a possibility, they haven't changed for the past few years, but there's a possibility they might change if the entirety of the internet improves. So you're looking at seconds for the largest contentful paint, and you're looking at milliseconds for the first input delay, and a number between 0 and 1 for the cumulative layout. In fact, it can potentially be larger than 1. It is possible for the, like, it might surprise you, but it is possible for content to shift so much that it actually shifts by more than the size of the screen. So there's just a ratio between the size of the screen and by how much the content has jumped around, right? So you get that immediately if it's available. If it's not available, you're not going to get it at all, which brings me to a point slightly tangential, but important. Get your own data. It is also possible for you to measure core vitals using real user monitoring, right? I'm not going to get into detail on that, but it is useful. So then you get into Lighthouse. Then you get into sort of a lab test where Chrome's internal tool, Lighthouse, which is also publicly available, including through this interface, starts measuring different things, and you can see accessibility, best practices, and even SEO here, right? So there's lots of stuff mixed in, including performance, right? And so there's a relatively complicated formula on how this number gets calculated. But important to remember, you see, a perfectly green passing core vitals website might be having a red score on performance, and that is in some sense fine, because for this particular website, the audience probably is largely in areas with networks and devices where everything works out well for them, right? Lighthouse tests and gets the score based on a very poor network and a very old device, right? So this is by definition like almost, not if not the worst case scenario, then close to the worst case scenario for your user, right? So that this is what this number indicates. But the calculator is also linked from here. So if you're interested in exactly what is being calculated, you can also take a look. But the main reason I want to jump into this is because of another thing that I also wanted to show you is that here in the recommendations area, you can actually see recommendations, not just an advice on what to do, like sort of serve images that are appropriately sized, great stuff, but advice that is specific to the platform or the framework that this site is built on, so that you can take a little bit more specific action. We don't have this advice for all the frameworks and all the CMSs in the world, partially because this is an open source project and it's entirely community based. So people who contribute. And the Drupal information, as we shall see in a second, if I can switch. Did that work?
Yes.
Somebody, perfect, exactly. So now that we're looking at a Drupal site, and we'll go over some of the detail, some of the recommendations in a second, but you will also see here that you get Drupal specific recommendations. You can find where these come from in the Lighthouse repository on GitHub. There is a thing called stack packs. And so there's a Drupal stack pack. Feel free to contribute to it. If you have additional advice, if you think you know what you're doing, if you'd like to see more stuff in there, get involved with the community, provide your contributions. But let's spend literally, well, not much longer on going through the kind of recommendations that you can see here and the kind of usual suspects that we can see. And the reason we partially decided to use Drupal.org as an example here is because it's still, can correct me guys, it's still in Drupal 7, right?
That's right, Andre. Drupal.org, as some of you who are listening may know, is usually one of the last sites to upgrade to the sort of latest versions of Drupal because of the custom integrations for issue queues, for the Git repositories and the projects. So we tend to be sort of the last to leave the legacy systems. And that means that a lot of the recommendations we're seeing here are things that we're going to talk about that have been improved by this collaboration together with Google and Tag One already in later versions of Drupal. We'll talk about some things that have been committed to Drupal 9 in a moment. But yeah, that makes Drupal.org a really good case study for what's the before state look like and what are some actionable things that you can do if you're in that situation.
Exactly. If you feel really passionate about making improvements at Drupal 7 for some reason, you can jump right in and copy over the stuff that was launched in 9 and so on. It's a complicated process, but if you feel committed, you can probably get it done. But the examples here, talking about deferring off-screen images, right, seems to be one of the highest culprits for probably affecting, and I mean, if here, in fact, you can see show what is relevant to the different vitals. And if you click LCP, right, you'll actually, no, doesn't seem to be the one affecting that much. I don't know then the off-screen images, what they are. What are they culpable of? But in any case, they are slowing down the loading of the page. And the recommendation, the generic recommendation for Drupal, and we probably need to take a look at how to update this, is to install a module that can lazy load images. Well, as we're about to tell you today, like you don't need to do this anymore for Drupal 9 latest subversion of it and Drupal 10 for sure, because lazy loading will be just available for you by default, right? And you toggle which images you choose to lazy load or not. But that's the great news, right? You can still potentially get this wrong in the later versions of Drupal, but it's just become a lot easier to get this right. And the same applies to next gen formats, right? The generic recommendation is to use WebP and AVIF, and there's a lot of work that has gone into the later versions of Drupal to make sure that this is also more readily available to you. I think with that, pretty much, in the interest of time, maybe is probably all I had to show about that. But if people have questions in the chat, and I kind of lost track of the chat a little bit, so if there's any questions in the chat or in the Q&A about the tool, about the vitals themselves.
Yeah, one of the things.
Shirley won the challenge on the link between whitehouse.gov and Drupal. Well done. That is exactly right.
Yeah, and at different times, there's been a variety of open source implementations. There's been the White House on WordPress. There's been the White House on Drupal. There's a variety of other departments still there, and other organizations, the European Commission, the UN, NASA, all sorts of folks. So a nice little Easter egg there.
And Adam, thanks for dropping in the link to the Drupal stack pack. Do you want to say a word about stack packs? Maybe your experience with them, like so folks understand what the process looks like.
Yeah, I mean, we've made some contributions there already, I think, to the Drupal stack pack. They do tend to be somewhat generic in the sense that they're provided based on an audit. There's not a lot of internal information, so they sort of are generic, like use a modern image format or defer your scripts. Doesn't necessarily tell you how to solve the problem. But yeah, in terms of updating them, the project is actively maintained. So if there's improvements that we can make there, usually just opening up a pull request gets attention from the team, and we've been able to make improvements there. But they do sort of have to be generic because of the way they're run, the context that they're run in.
Yeah, so you'll see examples in there if you take a look at that link, folks. In fact, why don't I share screen really quickly? I don't see why not. If you are interested in sort of contributing to this, which is a part of our theme for today, is we want you to use these tools, but also maybe to give back and help Drupal as a whole get better. Right? There are these categories of things that might need improvement, like using modern image formats, and then there's recommended steps. So you can go in and say, oh, I think there's a better set of instructions for CSS aggregation, right? And so I want to provide a pull request to provide those better steps, or to include links to key documentation or things like that. So there's a variety of opportunities for improvement there. And these are what you'll see if you run Lighthouse on your site and it's detecting things that you could improve in the Drupal space. I did see one raised hand, and I want to encourage the participant who's doing that, if you could throw that question in the chat or the Q&A tab, we can take a look at it. We're not doing sort of live panelists chat at the moment, but again, the chat function of the Q&A should work if you did have a question there. And quickly, before we move on to, okay, what have we actually done? Like, what have we done in the Drupal community in partnership with Tag1, in partnership with Google, to actually make improvements based on the kinds of things that we've seen previously in Drupal sites? Before we get there, I want to encourage you to take a look at your own sites. This tool that Andre showed us is something that you can use right now. pagespeed.web.dev will get you there. You can drop in a URL and you can begin to see some of these details on projects that you work on today. Rajab in the chat linked another tool that does some similar work, incorporated. I believe that team has added some more Drupal specific things. And of course, there's the Lighthouse implementation as well. So what I think we want to do, Adam, is maybe talk to you next to talk about, what's the approach for an organization the size and the scale of Google to come collaborate with a CMS project like Drupal or like WordPress or anyone else? And, what's kind of the structure and attitude towards figuring out how to create that collaboration and make these improvements?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, our team is very much focused on the open source CMS space. So that's what I'm going to focus on. And so there are literally hundreds, maybe thousands of CMSs around the world. And the idea is to help bring up the open web as a whole by improving the core of these CMSs. And WordPress is obviously the largest one by numbers, so we've focused a lot there. Drupal's kind of, I would say, number 2 in most markets, so I think also very important in certain verticals. And the idea is to make sure that those CMSs provide the right APIs, the right tools for developers, so that they can do the best job for creating websites. And what we've seen, like when you look at that field data, I think we've seen, like in these charts, that overall CMSs aren't doing very well. Like compared to like on Core Web Vitals, overall sites that are built in WordPress, sites that are built in Drupal are doing a little better, but overall there's a lot of room for improvement. Is a small percentage of sites that really pass these metrics. And I think you mentioned it before, that what we're sort of competing with are the experiences that people have when they're using apps on their phones. And we all know how fast and responsive those experiences are. And the goal is to kind of bring the web up to where it functions just like an app does on your phone, where things load instantly, they're responsive. And the Core Web Vitals are just a great way to approach this, because they really get at the user's experience and not just sort of the raw speed metrics that we've maybe used in the past. So in terms of our engagement, what we've been doing in the last year plus, a couple of years, is trying to work directly with the CMSs. In WordPress, we've formed a performance team to focus on performance. And then also working with like agencies in the space to help us deliver specific improvements that we've recognized. So that's tag one here. We've worked quite a bit in the WordPress space with 10up, which is another big agency in that space. And so trying to introduce those changes into Core so that either every site's going to get faster or have better page experience, or at least developers will have the tooling that they need to improve performance in the future.
I think there's a great example of how this approach has a broader impact than maybe it even seems like it might at first, because as you say, this focuses on these platforms as a whole. Open source CMSs make up a significant percentage of the web. I've seen numbers as high as like 50% of all web pages are served on some of these open source CMS platforms, or across the CMS space in general. And if the improvement is made on the platform level, it's great to also give individual site owners the tools to make changes to their specific site. But when you came to us and said, hey, we want to collaborate so that out of the box, by default, these improvements are just in Drupal for everyone, that rising tide raises all of the ships, improves Drupal everywhere. And we've seen even beyond that, improvements that have gone just to the wider PHP ecosystem. So we worked with another Googler, Ben Morse, early in this process on one of the things you saw in the PageSpeed audit, this idea of using more modern image formats, right? And we were like, hey, AVIF would be a really cool thing to support. And as we worked on it together, we discovered, it needs upstream support in PHP. To make this possible. And because of that collaboration, that upstream support got into PHP and then got into Drupal, and kind of made these sort of things possible. So we're what I really appreciate and why the Drupal Association is so committed to this kind of partnership is we're not going one by one to improve individual websites. We're trying to improve the web as a whole. So speaking quickly about these partnerships, and Andre, I'll let you chime in as well. If you're out there and you're a partner organization of the Drupal Association, we want to hear from you, because one of the things that we see our role as the DA is to help connect potential partners to each other to advance these goals for Drupal specifically and for the open web in general. And so it was sort of my pleasure to help introduce Andre to the Tag One team as one of the major contributors to Drupal and experts in performance, as a way to help advance some of this collaboration, in addition to everything we were doing with the community out in the open and in the issue queues. So Andrea, I don't know if you want to say a few words about that partnership. We'll keep it quick in order for time, and then let Yannis and Fabian tell us a little bit about what specific work they did to improve Drupal.
Absolutely. I think the work that Yannis and Fabian are going to talk about will speak for itself, but all I can say on our part has been a tremendous partnership. We've enjoyed the collaboration, and this is exactly what we've been looking for, the ability to innovate together, the ability to find solutions for challenges that are not always obvious. And we're looking for more of the same. We will continue our collaboration with Tag One for sure. And as you said, Tim, we're really, really open, and we're really welcoming more ideas. And in fact, Adam has quickly mentioned the performance team. We're still, keeping our fingers crossed for being able to spin up a similar initiative within the Drupal space, so we can all participate in this together.
Yep.
But with that,
awesome.
I think
Sorry. So with that, I think it would be great to, Yannis, I'd love to hand it over to you. So we got together. We have these lofty ideas about improving the open web. We have Core Web Vitals to use as our metrics to understand success. But what did we actually do? What has this collaboration sort of actually achieved so far? Where did we go? Why don't you walk us through that?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Tim. So there are a lot of things that could be done, right? Some of them, as you already mentioned, is example of AVIF, which is a really nice idea, but then it turned out that it's a longer-term engagement, longer-term project, because it involves bringing things into GD and PHP and so on. And then on the other hand, there are really low-hanging fruit that might not have such a big impact. Like one example that I can think of is Lighthouse would recommend you to use modern image formats, and we could, for example, update Umami or standard install to convert all image styles to WebP, which is already in the core. But that wouldn't affect a lot of sites outside of Umami because people generally create their own image styles.
They're using their own theme. Yeah, most of the time.
Exactly.
They help everybody using a demo, but that's probably not the majority of live sites.
Exactly. But it's also worth mentioning, you have this functionality in core. And if you want to use these modern image formats, WebP is there and you can start using it today. But yeah, we have to talk what we added to core. And as I said, we were trying to find something that is lower hanging fruit, but still have a lot of impact. And we talked to the community, we look at the issue queues, look at the AU open issues, and we saw that lazy loading came up a few times. And lazy loading is not the simplest thing to do, but it's also something, if done right, could automatically benefit every website, new installs and existing installs, like not just like changing the image styles in Umami, which would only change Umami, which, by the way, is doing really good with Core Web Vitals. So we figured out that usually Drupal core comes with very good performance, and then we destroy it along the way. So we have to learn how not to do that.
You sure I shouldn't just add 10 modules willy-nilly and just...
yeah, we've all done that. So, so yes, we decided that lazy loading is something we could and should look at, and we divided it into 4 steps. First step was enabling lazy loading for non-responsive images. Then second step was enabling lazy loading for responsive images, and then for enabling it for O embeds, and to enable it on things that are embedded into CK editor. And lazy loading of non-responsive images was committed and released with Drupal 9.2. So if your website is updated to 9.2 or greater, you have lazy loading of images enabled by default. Then we realized that while we do usually want lazy loading to be enabled for most images, there are some cases where you don't want to have that. And that is one example. The biggest example is like a hero image that appears at the top of the page immediately when the page loads. That you don't want to lazy load, you want to deliver it immediately. And that's why in 9.4, we added a possibility to configure whether an image should be lazy loaded or not. So if you update to 9.4, you can go into image formatter configuration and decide whether you want lazy loading or not. And that's great. But unfortunately, we still don't have lazy loading for responsive images available. But that was already committed, and it's coming out with Drupal 10.1, which we're super excited about. And yeah, if you are a little bit adventurous, maybe you can go and grab a patch and apply it to your Drupal 9 site, and already leverage that And I have to say that we've also done that with some of our client sites, and it works great. Another thing that is coming out in 10.1 is lazy loading of all embeds. So if you are embedding like a social post or something like that, you can lazy load it. And I'm actually quite excited that I had to update the notes for this webinar literally 15 minutes before we started it, because there was this last thing about lazy loading images that appear inside WYSIWYG, inside CK Editor, that was still open yesterday. And just when I started do last minute preps, I saw that that issue was committed as well. So lazy loading of images that are in CK Editor is coming to 10.1 as well. It's implemented as a text filter, so you will configure it in your text format, and it's basically opt-out. So by default, images will lazy load, but you can override that.
That's awesome.
So yeah, that's what we've done. We're really excited about it, and we're looking forward for Drupal's performance metrics to grow on those graphs that I believe we will see at some point today.
Yeah, in fact, I think that's probably where we'll go next. So I'm going to put up on the screen a couple of, we've talked about, hey, we've done this collaboration. This has been between Google and the DA, has been a multi-year effort and a significant amount of time with Tag One. And, we've done educational campaigns at DrupalCon in webinars like this one, workshops, as well as these collaborations directly in Drupal core. And it would be good to see, how are we doing? Have we made an impact? Have we moved the needle? I think that's really important. And so there's another tool, Data Studio tool that Google provides, where I'd love to share some of this data and get some color commentary here from Fabian about our success and what we've doing. So I have two reports that I want to show off really quick. The first is the Core Web Vitals technology report showing Drupal against the most common enterprise level proprietary CMS ecosystems. So you can see here, the dark blue line here is sort of just the picture of all of the web and how it's kind of maybe generally doing right now. Drupal here is in light blue, AEM in pink, and Sitecore in orange here. And I'm really thrilled to see this for several reasons. One is, even from the start, we've sort of been better than the web on average in the Drupal ecosystem. But not only that, we've had significant increases in the, in our results, in the quality of the Core Web Vitals scores for the Drupal sites that have been indexed by this system, such that it's almost 50%. It's almost 1 in 2 index sites have this passing kind of grade on the Core Web Vitals, which is a really impressive milestone. And not to be mean about it, but I always love to see an open source ecosystem being so successful in comparison to closed source ecosystems that have billions of dollars in funding that we don't have. And yet, our focus on community collaboration, on working with great partners, and on sort of taking seriously the open web from a philosophical point of view and not just a business perspective has really paid off. So I personally think that's really powerful. And then really quickly, this is Drupal in the context of other open source CMS platforms. And it also looks great. All of these CMS platforms have been increasing in their Core Web Vitals. The open web as a whole has been successful in these efforts to improve these performance metrics. But before we get a little too cocky about this, there are other open source CMSs, and even in the PHP space, that are still doing perhaps, if it loads, that are still doing perhaps a little better than us. So, you got to be careful how you pick your data. But so we have some things that we can still learn in the Drupal space, some more space to go to catch up with the likes of folks like Typo3, who have done a great job as well. So there's awesome things to do here, great signs of early progress, but also still more room to grow. So Fabian, let me sort of give you the mic, and anything you'd like to kind of add to this analysis?
It would be cool if you could switch the client over quickly from mobile to desktop as suggested.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I didn't even notice that was suggested. There you go.
Yeah, this is also looking really good. Here we are going even over the 50%. So yeah, I agree with you. That it's really nice to be as a little David against a Goliath to have such an impact on the open web. And it's really great collaboration. It's also great how we can definitely see on the graph, especially on mobile, but that was visible, how we could change that all. And Adam said we should really quickly look at the settings tab. So that might be a good idea just to go over there real quick. So what is really important here on the settings tab is that we can also look at that origins, but what's much more important is what I alluded to earlier is the geographic, where the geographic is coming from. Because, for example, if you're looking at your geographics just related to how is it looking like in the United States, then it gives a different picture. Like if you, for example, select South Africa, which yeah, we can try.
Doing it
test
live.
that before, so hopefully.
Let's see here. Live demos.
Still pretty good, I think. Yeah, and then there's other parts of what we can focus on, but yeah, there's lots of interesting stuff. And yeah, if you care about inclusion, it's definitely a very good idea to and have an international audience. Like if no one from international ever visits your site, it's fine to just focus on USA, because that's where you get the biggest bang for the buck for your performance optimizations. But as soon as you go over to other parts, then it's definitely a good idea to just check, hey, how does my site even perform for visitors from Asia and or from South Africa or from South America, etc., like that? And is there a difference between mainstream Europe and mainstream USA, and then going to the other regions? So I find that one of the most important parts. But yeah, if you could go quickly back to mobile, even though Drupal 3 is ahead and kind of like also optimized in certain ways. There's more to come. Again, I want to thank Google for bringing in AVIF support in the PHP ecosystem. This is kind of huge. That happened early based on a conversation we had with some. That was like, hey, if you really want AVIF everywhere, we need it in libgd, because only then CMS can support it. And that's kind of what someone from Google did, Ben Morse. So shout outs to him. That was really great to get this. And at one point it will go in core. But as you can see, this is a quantifiable competitive advantage for every user of Drupal 9, Drupal 10, and hopefully will also help us get more people to Drupal. Because if you're doing a talk like why use Drupal for your manager, for your client, whoever, this is a slide you can generate yourself and say like, hey, yeah, if you use AM, you'll have 50% less score in certain metrics. And yeah, that's not a good idea. So that's what. And so hopefully we have then this as an additional advantage in addition to the already great user experience we have. And yeah, and everything should be better. So just focus on those core web vitals.
Fantastic. So we could clearly talk about this for a whole other hour, and we are a little bit behind our schedule, but our questions are really focused. We do have one more section we want to talk about that we'll try and move through relatively quickly, which is what's next. Google is committed to continuing to work with the Drupal community and other ecosystems, other open source projects to help improve the open web. And I want to talk about a little bit about why that is, but then also specifically what we're doing. We have some very interesting, compelling project ideas for how we want to collaborate next. And as we talk about those, I'd encourage you listening to this to think about, are you interested in participating? Are you interested in this notion of creating a sort of performance working group in Drupal? All these things that could accompany it. But first, Andre, let me go to you. What is it that made you, as we evaluated kind of, a year's worth of collaboration and work together, decide, hey, we want to keep doing this?
I think in the shortest possible terms, it's bang for the buck. I don't want to say we went out on a limb. I think we knew what we were trying to invest in a year ago, approximately. We had a fairly good idea of how this was supposed to turn out, and it exceeded our expectations. I mean, you see the results speak for themselves. It's not only the changes that we've built together that have pushed Drupal's performance higher, but we never expected that to be the case. That investment is only part of the overall surrounding work, doing webinars like this, talking to the community, visiting community events, and generally raising the profile of user experience within the community and its importance, that will keep driving it up. So that's it. There's no alternatives for us. We definitely want to be part of this journey.
That's awesome. And I'm certainly proud of that collaboration and what partners like Google, like Tag One, like other partners of the association, like our community contributors have been able to do over the course of this time. So let's pivot to talk about, a sort of proposed next step, which has to do with, okay, we know the importance of performance, but how can we make evaluation of performance, sort of testing of performance, integral to how we do ongoing development of Drupal? So Fabian, maybe you can start off with, what is the kind of nature, purpose, and value of performance testing, and kind of how does it work? And then you and Yannis can talk about kind of what this opportunity is and what we're thinking of doing next.
So automated performance testing is something that was originally proposed in, I think it was 2013. So it's great that in 2023, we finally get to it. I did a talk about it in DrupalCon Prague 2013, I think it was. So automated performance testing or tracking means essentially that it's like a CI system. You essentially ensure that things do not regress, and that's so important. Because, and the problem with anyone that did sites without automated testing and then sites with automated testing, well, now is if you don't have automated testing, you better have a very, very good QA department that is then doing manual testing, what automated tests would do. Because if you don't have any automated testing, then things can regress without you even noticing. And that's the same with performance tracking. And one of the huge problems we had in Drupal always that made automated performance tracking pretty complicated was we did not have a real site. So if you were testing minimal, yeah, you would probably get some things, but then if a template changes by a few milliseconds, who can know that? Is it impactful? Is it not? Obviously, at the scale of thousands of templates, 1 millisecond makes a huge difference because it's almost a second then, etc. like that. So this is one of the huge problems that we ran into when we were originally doing that. And standard was, yeah, it had a few modules, but it was pretty light. It was not a real site. It did not have that. With Umami, all of that changed. And actually at Tag One, we already have an Umami load test based on Goose, which you can run. It's open source, it's free. So if you want to do some Umami testing, if you want to rack up a huge bill on your CDN, you can do it. We did so. And so this is kind of what it's about. You can think of it as like automated testing, but for the specific metric of ensuring that performance does not regress.
Awesome. And so this is going to require collaboration between, folks like you at Tag One who've done this before and have the expertise to help us as a community figure out how to implement it. And then, of course, all of the community members who are part of it, collaborating with folks like the Google team to understand, right, okay, so when we're creating our, output of these tests, getting our core Web Vitals metrics in there and all of those things. But Yanis, can you maybe, and I know we don't have much time, but could you bullet quickly the different impacts that we hope this will have on the project?
I should unmute myself.
Yes.
Yes. So first and very important thing is that we get the data. Like right now, when core maintainers do manual performance testing, we don't have any historical data. It's just like one-off testing. And when we will start collecting this data from this automated performance tests, we will be able to compare, which is very important. We'll be able to identify which commit caused a performance regression or which version, and so on and so on. And by doing so, we will be able to quickly identify potential regressions, problems, which will, and then by fixing them, we will also not just speed the general Drupal sites, but also Drupal development, because if our testing will run faster, our contributors will spend less time waiting and will be able to focus more on actually contributing changes that matter.
To provide some color there, a complete suite of the core test run takes about an hour and 20 minutes today on a 32 core, 64 thread machine with 32 gigs of RAM and all these things, right? Like that's waiting time where someone has to switch gears, wait for their test results to come back. If that's, if that's a little faster, that's time back, that's quicker iteration, that's better improvement for everybody. It's a big deal. There's probably 15,000 tests easily every month run on Drupal Association infrastructure between core and contrib. And that's hours and hours and hours of contributor time that we could optimize.
Yeah, and then since you already mentioned it, there is also environmental impact.
Yeah.
If we can speed up 15,000 tests each month, we will spend less CPU time, which means less energy, which means, it's better for the environment, which is a very important thing. And why not do it if we can?
I'd love to see I'd love to see a version of the Web Vitals report that was, something similar to that graph. That's like here's the carbon reduction report of the web being faster, right? Like, I think that would be a really cool metric. So.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and then at the end, it's all the organizations that are using Drupal and all the end users would benefit from this, because their websites, the organization's websites would be faster and the end users would get better experience. And then at the end, community benefits, because we're better, our users would be happier, we are saving the planet, our developers are happier. So as Fabian said, it's about happiness, and if everybody's happier, it means that we've done something good.
Yeah. So in our last 2 minutes, I'm going to try and speed run through some of our final content here. If some of our panelists might have to hop off, if not, we'll try and answer a little bit of the questions here. But there are other tools out there, right? This is not the only initiative, but we do think that an investment in automated performance testing for Drupal has a significant potential for impact on end users, on the community trying to contribute, on the environment. There's many good reasons to do it. But in addition to that, there's other initiatives. There's a great web profiler project led by Luca Lusso. There was a Tag One podcast about it that I'll drop the link in the chat. That's another very cool project in a similar vein that would be something worth checking out. And sort of general load testing and all of those things. And these are things that this collaboration can enable, but also that we'll have to sort of fundraise to support. It'll take infrastructure to manage and run automated load testing for the Drupal project, especially at the scale that we want to do it. So one of the things that I would ask each of you is to think about those Drupal Association memberships, think about talking about your organizations, updating their partnership levels, and just ways to help support and fund these kinds of improvements that I think will have a really big impact. So very quickly, I know we're technically over time now. I'd like each person to maybe give one takeaway, one action item that the audience can give. So Yanis, maybe I'll start with you really quick. What would you like people coming away from this presentation to do next?
Yeah, I would suggest update your Drupal sites to most recent version if you didn't already, and try using image lazy loading. And if you feel a little bit adventurous, apply patches for the things that are coming out in 10.1, and try using those.
Awesome. Andre or Adam, what would you have folks do coming out of this?
Well, I'll be very obvious since we spent quite a bit of time talking about it. Use pagespeed.web.dev to test your site and your client's website now and figure out what needs to change there tomorrow.
Awesome.
And
And
I was
Fabian?
going to say the same thing, but I'll just say a good takeaway for me would be that the web vitals are really about how users experience your site and understanding the value of that and not just about speed. So
Right.
my hope is that everyone will adopt a mindset of caring about their users.
I think that's a really good point. Fabian, how about you?
I stick to my point and just say, make your users happy, look at your core web vitals, improve them, and make them even happier.
Fantastic. So, and as I said before, if you're out there and listening, you can be part of these solutions. We are an open source community, an open source project. Everyone here is involved because they're passionate about open source, on top of, being part of their job role and things like that. And so we'd love to have your participation. So again, thank you everyone for attending. We'll say we've got one question here, so we'll try and answer it really quickly. And then we'll let you all go. So Rajab has asked, will there be a built-in intersection observer IO in Drupal core for better lazy loading effects or controls? Is there an API from Drupal for that? This is not something I know the answer to. I wonder if Yanis or Fabian, if you have heard any rumblings about that in the course of the implementations that have been happening so far. I get the impression that this would be an enhancement beyond what we're already doing, but I'll let you answer.
My answer would be I don't know about any initiative related to that, but I will let Fabian chime in if you have any more info.
No, don't. I mean, we start kind of like this unofficial initiative on performance, so it might be part of that. But yeah, we are not yet. It's an official thing, I think.
Okay. Well, I would love to take more questions, but to be completely honest, I think that is all the time we have. And certainly we've been thankful for your time. Thank you to have you here with us. We will send the recording information out after this presentation. We would be happy to answer further questions. So you can reach out to the Drupal Association by finding contact form on the association staff page. You can reach out in the issue queues. You could actually everyone present on this call is available either following some issues or in the Drupal Slack. So we'd love to hear from you. And if you want to be put in touch with anyone in particular, feel free to reach out to me specifically. But again, thank you very much for your time. Thank you to our speakers. And we're looking forward to coming back again and sharing with you the next wave of improvements in Drupal and for the open web and talking about this further. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Bye.